All right, let's get started with today's news roundup. We've got a pretty interesting mix of stories for you today, from some unexpected international deals to some heartbreaking human stories.
Yeah, sounds like it'll be quite a journey.
It really does. Let's dive in with a story about a surprising deal developing between the U.S. and Ukraine. And it's not about military aid this time, which is what you might expect, but something a little less conventional: minerals.
Right, specifically rare earth minerals. These are essential for a huge range of technologies, from the smartphones we use every day to the electric vehicles that are becoming so popular. The U.S. is looking to get access to Ukraine's reserves of these minerals.
Now, this isn't just a straightforward business transaction, though Zelensky actually sees this as an opportunity to really get concrete U.S. support in the ongoing conflict with Russia. He wants security guarantees to be part of the deal.
He's definitely taking a strong stance on that. He even said, and I quote, "If we don't get security guarantees, we won't have a ceasefire. Nothing will work, nothing." So it's clear how vital this is to him.
Strong words indeed.
hmm
And then there's the whole financial angle, too. Trump claims that the U.S. has given Ukraine billions in aid and wants to use this deal to get that money back. But the actual amount of aid given is a point of contention.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex situation, with economic interests, geopolitics, security concerns. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out and what it means for Ukraine in the long run.
It definitely will.
hmm
But let's shift our focus to a story that's far more grim. We're heading to Southeast Asia, where a really troubling scam operation has been happening in Myanmar. Imagine being promised a decent job in Thailand, only to find yourself caught up in this brutal online scam operation.
Yeah, it's awful. These operations are essentially like modern-day slave labor camps.
Yeah.
The workers are forced to participate in these online scams, and if they don't meet their targets, they face really severe punishments, threats, beatings, even electric shocks.
Horrible. Recently, though, Thailand actually started cracking down on these operations. They've been cutting off utilities to the compounds and issuing arrest warrants. And as a result, thousands of workers have been released.
But unfortunately, that hasn't been the end of their ordeal. These people, instead of finding freedom, are now stuck in these makeshift camps inside Myanmar. The conditions in these camps are really unsanitary, and they're receiving very little support. And efforts to repatriate them have been incredibly slow.
Tragic: one worker, who called himself Mike, said, "I just want to go home. That is all I am asking." And some countries are actually dragging their feet on getting these people home, even going so far as to demand that someone else pay to bring their own citizens back.
It's a really terrible situation that reveals the dark realities of human trafficking and how ineffective international systems can be at protecting the most vulnerable. It really raises questions about how far a government's responsibility extends to its citizens when they're caught in such desperate circumstances.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to Europe, where there's a story that's raising serious questions about accountability and how transparent governments really are.
You're talking about the terrible shipwreck that happened off the coast of Greece back in June 2023, when hundreds of migrants drowned. There have been accusations that the Greek Coast Guard might have actually caused the boat to capsize while they were trying to tow it, but of course the Coast Guard denies that.
Right. And to make things even more concerning, leaked audio recordings have surfaced of conversations between the Coast Guard and some other ships nearby. These recordings seem to contradict the official story the Coast Guard has given.
Yeah, it's pretty damning. In one recording, you can actually hear a Coast Guard officer telling the captain of another ship to give the migrant boat supplies, and then he tells them to instruct the migrants to say they don't want to go to Greece, but to Italy instead.
Wow.
Oof.
So legal experts are calling this a potential cover-up, and human rights groups are demanding a truly independent investigation, which is understandable. This whole situation really needs a thorough investigation to figure out what really happened and to hold people accountable for such a tragic loss of life.
Absolutely. But for now, let's step away from such a heavy story and explore something a bit more lighthearted, shall we?
Yes, please. I could definitely use a change of pace. Let's talk about something that's been around for almost 30 years, but is still going strong: Pokemon.
It's true. Pokemon has become a global phenomenon, one of the most successful media franchises in the entire world. And the CEO of the Pokemon company, Mr. Ishihara, believes that it can last for another 50 to 100 years.
Wow, that's impressive. What's his secret? How does he plan to keep it going for that long?
He's focusing on innovation, on blurring the lines between reality and the virtual world. They've already had massive success with Pokemon Go, which brought those virtual creatures into our physical spaces. But keeping that momentum going won't be easy.
They've got some challenges ahead of them, that's for sure. Things like scalpers driving up the prices of those rare Pokemon cards, counterfeit products flooding the market, and even some legal battles over copycat games.
For sure. But one advantage they have is that they're a private company. That means they're not beholden to the demands of shareholders and can really focus on what they do best. Pokemon.
That definitely gives them some flexibility. Now, shifting gears completely, let's talk about a company facing a huge challenge and taking a pretty unconventional approach to deal with it. We're talking about the biggest crypto heist in history, where North Korea's Lazarus Group stole a massive $146 billion from the Bybit trading platform.
It's an unbelievable amount of money. But Bybit, instead of relying solely on traditional law enforcement, has decided to do something different. They're crowdsourcing help.
They're bringing in the online bounty hunters.
Exactly. They've set up a website that tracks the movement of the stolen crypto and offers rewards to anyone who can provide information that helps them recover those funds. They even have a pretty striking logo on the website featuring Kim Jong-un's hair with a knife through it.
Wow, that's definitely a statement. This is a really bold move, and it makes you wonder about the future of cybersecurity as a whole. Is this the beginning of a trend where we see more private companies and online communities stepping up to fight cybercrime?
It's certainly possible, especially since cybercrime is becoming more and more sophisticated and traditional law enforcement is having trouble keeping up. Now, let's turn our attention to a story that exposes some of the harsh economic realities in India. India's economy has been growing impressively in recent years, but it seems that prosperity hasn't reached everyone.
A new report has found that 1 billion Indians, that's right, 1 billion, have no discretionary spending power. That means they can barely afford the basic necessities, let alone anything extra.
That's a staggering figure. The report also says that the consuming class in India, the people who can afford to buy things beyond the essentials, is only about the size of Mexico's population.
It's really creating a two-tiered consumer market.
Yeah.
You've got this trend of premiumization, where brands are focusing on expensive, high-end products for the wealthy, while the majority of the population struggles.
You see it everywhere. Luxury housing and premium phones are selling like hotcakes, while the number of affordable homes is shrinking. And those expensive concert tickets always seem to sell out, even while millions are just scraping by.
What's driving this economic divide?
There's several factors at play. Income inequality, wages that aren't keeping up with the cost of living, rising debt, and limited access to things like education and healthcare. And then you've got the looming threat of job losses due to automation and AI, which could make things even worse.
It's a troubling situation that raises serious concerns about the future of India and whether or not everyone will benefit from the country's growth. Now let's talk about a familiar face who's been making headlines. Pamela Anderson. She's back in the spotlight, but not for her iconic Baywatch role.
Right, she's getting attention for her acting in a film called The Last Showgirl. The film explores themes of second chances, which really resonate with Anderson's own life story.
She didn't get an Oscar nomination for this role, but she seems to be taking it all in stride. She was quoted as saying, "The win is the work," which I think shows a really mature and insightful perspective.
It definitely suggests a shift in focus. She's also talking more openly about embracing a more natural look, moving away from heavy makeup, and emphasizing self-acceptance. It's a big change from her Baywatch image.
It is. And speaking of changing landscapes, let's wrap up this first part with a look at Afghanistan under Taliban rule, where surveillance and control have become the norm.
Kabul has become a city covered in cameras, with thousands of them monitoring the streets. Facial recognition technology is being used to track people's movements in real time. It's a far cry from what many expected when the Taliban took over.
The Taliban made promises to reduce crime and bring stability after years of conflict. But this level of surveillance is really concerning. What does it mean for human rights and privacy in the country?
There's a huge potential for misuse. Will they use this technology to target women who choose to show their faces, or dissidents who dare to speak out against the regime? It's a very unsettling thought.
It's a chilling reminder that the fight for freedom and basic human rights is far from over. And to make matters worse, reports indicate that people in Kabul are being forced to pay for these cameras, even though many are struggling with poverty and hunger. It adds another layer of injustice to an already difficult situation.
It really highlights the authoritarian nature of the Taliban's rule and the disregard they seem to have for the basic needs and freedoms of their people. It paints a pretty bleak picture of life under their control.
Yeah, it's a stark example of how technology can be used, not always for good, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about a different kind of power struggle, this time happening within the corporate world. Apple's commitment to diversity and inclusion programs is being questioned by some of their own shareholders. Oh, that's interesting. It's definitely a hot-button issue these days. Some shareholders are calling for Apple to just get rid of its DEI initiatives altogether.
Yeah.
They say it's putting the company at risk, both legally and financially.
Right. Their argument is that hiring should be based solely on merit, skills and qualifications. They believe that DEI programs could actually lead to reverse discrimination, which could ultimately hurt the company.
But there are others who argue that DEI is absolutely necessary to address the systemic biases that exist and to create truly equal opportunities for everyone. It's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
Definitely. And Apple, being such a huge global company, has to figure out how to navigate these different perspectives and all the political pressure that comes with it. CEO Tim Cook actually addressed this issue at a recent shareholder meeting.
Did he give any indication of how Apple plans to move forward?
He said that they might need to make some adjustments to their DEI practices because the legal landscape is constantly changing. But he also emphasized that Apple is committed to dignity and respect for everyone, which he says is a core value for the company.
So it seems like they're trying to find a balance, trying to keep their shareholders happy while staying true to their principles. It'll be interesting to see how their policies evolve over time.
It will. Now, let's move from the corporate world to a region grappling with political tensions and the legacy of a very difficult past, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
A really significant trial has just concluded there, and the verdict could have a major impact on the country's stability. It revolves around Milorad Dodik, the Bosnian Serb leader who's been a controversial figure for a long time.
Dodik was convicted of ignoring rulings made by the International High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. That position was established after the Bosnian War to help oversee the peace process. But Dodik has been pushing for the secession of Republika Srpska, the Serb-dominated part of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
So basically, his actions have been seen as a threat to the country's unity and the peace that's been so hard won.
Exactly. This conviction is a pretty big deal. It highlights the ongoing tension between the international community's efforts to maintain peace and the ambitions of these ethno-nationalist leaders like Dodik.
What was the outcome of the trial?
He was sentenced to jail time and is now banned from holding public office. But Dodik isn't backing down. He's calling the verdict nonsense. So it seems like this political fight is far from over.
It sounds like Bosnia and Herzegovina is still facing deep divisions from the war. It's a reminder of how fragile peace can be even years after a conflict has officially ended. Speaking of the human cost of war and the longing for the return of loved ones, there's a story from Israel that's really captured the nation's attention. The story of the Beavis family.
Their story is heartbreaking. Shiri Beavis and her two young sons, Ariel and Kafir, were among those taken hostage by Hamas during that attack. It really brought the horrors of the conflict into sharp focus.
Yeah, I remember seeing those images of the two boys, their faces filled with fear. It was just devastating. Their father, Yarden, was released in a prisoner exchange, but his wife and sons remained captive.
The family held on to hope for so long, but just last week, their hopes were shattered. The remains of Ariel and Kafir were returned to Israel, and their identities were confirmed through DNA testing.
Oh, that's just awful. How did the Israeli government respond?
They said that the boys were murdered by their captors, contradicting Hamas's claim that they died in an Israeli airstrike. And to add another layer of tragedy to this whole situation, there was a horrific mix-up.
What happened?
Well, the coffin that was supposed to contain Shiri's remains actually held the body of a Palestinian woman from Gaza. Hamas claims it was an honest mistake, a result of all the chaos after the bombings. But the Beavis family is still waiting for Shiri's body to be returned and for some semblance of justice.
It's a stark reminder that the impact of conflict, the loss of innocent lives, extends far beyond any ceasefire or prisoner exchange. Finding true peace and closure is a long and difficult road. Now, from a region marked by conflict, let's shift our focus to another area where tensions are running high: the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, the situation there is really escalating between Israeli forces and Palestinian armed groups. What started as a targeted operation against militants has turned into a full-blown humanitarian crisis.
How did it get to this point?
Well, the Israeli army launched this operation called Operation Iron Wall back in January. They were trying to crack down on Palestinian militant groups that were responsible for attacks. but the operation has expanded significantly. Israeli forces have bulldozed roads, demolished homes, and imposed strict limits on movement.
That sounds incredibly disruptive. What's been the impact on the Palestinian people?
It's led to mass displacement of Palestinians from 4 refugee camps in the northern West Bank. Agencies are calling it a humanitarian crisis. Thousands of people are seeking shelter in these overcrowded camps or with relatives.
It's being compared to the largest displacement of Palestinians since the 1967 Six-Day War. That's really concerning. Where is the situation the worst?
The Tulkarm refugee camp has been hit especially hard. There's been extensive destruction there, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble.
But what's the Israeli army's justification for these actions?
They say they're only going after militants and that they've given civilians safe passage out of the conflict zones. But residents are telling a different story. They're describing forced evacuations under fire and even receiving instructions to leave their homes via drones.
So it seems like the situation is incredibly volatile, with a high risk of further escalation. And of course, it's the innocent civilians who are caught in the crossfire and suffering the most. Now let's circle back to a story we discussed earlier. That massive crypto heist carried out by North Korea's Lazarus Group.
Right, we talked about Bybit, the company that was targeted, and their decision to enlist the help of online bounty hunters to track down the stolen funds. It's a pretty fascinating example of crowdsourcing being used to fight cybercrime.
And is it working?
It seems like it is Bybit's website, which tracks the movement of that stolen cryptocurrency, has already paid out millions of dollars in rewards to those who have helped. These crypto sleuths have been instrumental in identifying and freezing some of the stolen assets.
It's like a modern-day digital Wild West out there. These online bounty hunters are on the trail of cyber criminals. It really raises some questions about the future of law enforcement in this digital age. Could this kind of crowdsourcing approach become more common as traditional methods struggle to keep up with the tactics of cyber criminals?
It's definitely a possibility. We're seeing the lines blur between the public and private sectors, with companies like Bybit taking on roles that were traditionally handled by government agencies. It's a sign of how the world is changing and how private entities are stepping up to address the gaps in cybersecurity. But now let's turn our attention back to the economic landscape in India.
Earlier, we talked about the report that found 1 billion Indians lack discretionary spending power. They're struggling to afford even the basic necessities, while India's elite are enjoying a surge in luxury spending. It really highlights the growing gap between the rich and the poor in the country.
It's like two completely different worlds existing side by side. You have people buying luxury cars and the latest gadgets, while others can't even afford basic healthcare or education.
It's a real problem for India, and if it's not addressed, it could threaten the country's stability down the road. What can be done to bridge this gap and create more opportunities for everyone?
That's the million-dollar question. The report points to a number of factors that are contributing to this problem, including income inequality, limited access to education and healthcare, regional disparities, and the rising cost of living. And then, of course, you have the potential for job displacement due to automation and AI. It all adds up to a very complex and challenging situation.
India needs to find ways to address these underlying issues if they want to create a more equitable and sustainable economic future for all their citizens. But let's take a break from these weighty economic issues and talk about a story that shows the power of human resilience in the face of a major infrastructure failure.
Sounds good. We're heading to Santiago, Chile, where a power outage recently plunged the capital city into darkness. It was a scenario that could have easily descended into chaos, but the Chilean people responded with remarkable calm and composure.
What caused the outage?
It was a failure in the national power grid, and it had a cascading effect, disrupting transportation, communications, and essential services for hours. People were trapped in elevators, traffic lights went out, and businesses had to close their doors.
I bet that was frustrating. But you said people remained calm.
They did. In fact, amidst all the frustration and inconvenience, there were these heartwarming displays of human kindness. Restaurants and cafes gave away free food and water to people walking home in the dark. Strangers helped each other navigate the traffic jams, and people took to social media to share information and offer support.
That's really encouraging to hear. It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit and how we can come together in times of adversity. How did the government respond?
They declared a state of emergency and imposed a curfew to maintain order. But it was really the everyday citizens who made a difference during those dark hours. It shows that even when faced with unexpected challenges, we have the capacity for compassion and resilience. Speaking of unexpected challenges, let's talk about a story that sheds light on the pressures faced by child stars in Hollywood. The recent death of actress Michelle Trachtenberg, known for her roles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Gossip Girl at just 40 years old, has really prompted some soul-searching about the hidden struggles of those who find fame at such a young age.
It's a reminder that the entertainment industry can be incredibly demanding, especially for those who start out as children. But what were some of the challenges Trachtenberg spoke about?
She talked about experiencing inappropriate behavior and mistreatment from people in positions of power on set. It really highlights the vulnerability of these young actors who are often trying to navigate the complexities of fame and adulthood under a very bright spotlight.
It's a conversation that's long overdue. We need to do better to protect these young performers and create safe and supportive environments for them to thrive.
Absolutely. Trachtenberg's story is a tragic reminder that we need greater accountability in the industry and a real commitment to the well-being of child actors. Now, let's revisit the world of Pokemon one last time. Earlier, we talked about the CEO's vision for keeping the franchise alive for decades to come. It's clear they're not just relying on nostalgia, they're actively embracing innovation to attract new generations of fans.
What kind of innovations are we talking about?
They're experimenting with augmented reality, virtual reality, even the metaverse. Imagine being able to interact with your favorite Pokemon in these immersive virtual environments. They're also expanding beyond the core gaming audience, developing content and experiences that appeal to people of all ages and interests.
It's an ambitious strategy, but if anyone can pull it off, it's Pokemon. They've consistently reinvented themselves over the years, so it'll be exciting to see what they come up with next. Now, let's shift our attention to a story that highlights a concerning trend in Romania. A far-right political figure is stirring up controversy and facing legal challenges.
This is the story of Călin Georgescu. He's been accused of promoting fascism, racism, and anti-Semitism. He's also a vocal supporter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which goes against Romania's pro-Western stance.
His rhetoric is definitely alarming, especially in a country that has experienced both fascism and communism in its recent history. Is he gaining much traction?
He's still somewhat on the fringe, but his rising popularity is worrying to many, what landed him in legal trouble. Well, he's accused of trying to establish a political organization that prosecutors say promotes fascist, racist, or xenophobic characteristics, along with anti-Semitic views.
So, where does the case stand now?
He's under house arrest while the investigation continues. This case is a real test for Romania. It'll show how committed they are to upholding democratic values and fighting against extremist ideologies.
This story really reflects the struggles that many European countries are facing with the rise of populism and the resurgence of far-right movements. It's a stark reminder that the fight for democracy and human rights is an ongoing battle. What's been the public's reaction to Georgescu's case?
It's really divided public opinion. Some people see him as a political prisoner, while others condemn his views as dangerous and divisive. It's a reflection of the global struggle between liberalism and authoritarianism. The outcome of this case could have big implications for the future of Romanian politics and the fight against extremism in the country. Shifting gears now, let's look at the fragile peace process in the Middle East.
A recent prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas has been in the news. It's eased some tensions, but it's also raised some new concerns.
The exchange involved the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and detainees in exchange for the remains of 4 Israeli hostages. It was seen as a crucial step towards strengthening the ceasefire that ended the war in Gaza. But the handover ceremony itself revealed just how much mistrust and animosity still exists between the two sides.
What happened?
Hamas officials presented the coffins draped in Palestinian flags. Many people in Israel saw this as a deliberate provocation, even though they were fulfilling a key part of the agreement.
I can see how that would be interpreted as a hostile act, even if it wasn't intended that way. How did Israel react?
Some Israeli politicians were outraged. They accused Hamas of exploiting the situation for propaganda and called for the prisoner release to be stopped. But the exchange did eventually go ahead. It was a reminder that true reconciliation requires more than just prisoner swaps.
Absolutely. It requires a fundamental change in attitudes and a genuine commitment to addressing the root causes of the conflict. That's a difficult path, but it's really the only way to achieve lasting peace. Now, for our last story in this segment, we're traveling to a region that's been ravaged by war and instability, Syria. We're going to focus on the Kurdish people, who are facing new challenges as the Assad regime weakens.
The Kurds have been fighting on multiple fronts for years, against ISIS and against Turkey, which sees them as a threat. They played a crucial role in defeating ISIS, but their victory has come at a heavy price.
Absolutely. They have suffered countless casualties and their land has been devastated by years of fighting. Now, with a new government taking shape in Damascus, are they concerned about their future?
They are. They're worried that their hard-won autonomy could be at risk, especially with Turkey putting pressure on the new Syrian government to crack down on Kurdish forces.
So they're caught in a difficult position. What are they hoping for?
They want their autonomous region to be recognized and protected, but they're also wary of being pulled into the power struggles of this new Syrian government. The international community has largely abandoned the Kurds, leaving them to navigate this incredibly complex and dangerous situation on their own.
It's a tragic situation, and it highlights the ongoing complexities of the Syrian conflict and the lasting impact of war, even after the headlines have faded. But for a moment, let's step away from the conflict in Syria and talk about a different kind of disruption. A major power outage that brought life to a standstill in a major Canadian city.
You're talking about the massive blackout that recently hit Toronto. It started with a simple equipment failure, but it quickly escalated into a widespread disruption of essential services.
It's amazing how one small thing can have such a ripple effect. What was the impact of the outage?
Well, pretty much everything was affected. Traffic lights, subway lines, businesses, you name it. The city was plunged into darkness, and it caused major headaches for commuters and businesses. It really underscores how vulnerable we've become to infrastructure failures, especially as our world becomes more interconnected and reliant on technology.
How far-reaching was the impact?
It wasn't just Toronto that was affected. The outage extended across the entire province of Ontario, impacting millions of people. It was a real test of patience and resilience for everyone involved.
It sounds like it. Amidst all the chaos, were there any positive stories that emerged?
Absolutely. Even though there was a lot of frustration and inconvenience, people really came together to support each other. Neighbors shared flashlights, restaurants offered free meals to those who were stranded, and strangers helped direct traffic. It was really heartwarming to see.
It's a good reminder that even in the face of challenges, we can find ways to help each other out. So the outage ultimately highlighted the importance of strong community bonds and the need for robust infrastructure.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how one little glitch can cause so much chaos, isn't it? But for now, let's move on to a story that shows how people can come together and support each other when things go wrong.
Yeah, I'm ready for a more uplifting story. Let's hear it.
All right, well, this one takes us to Canada, to Toronto specifically, where a massive power outage recently brought the entire city to a standstill.
Oh, wow. A whole city without power. What happened?
It all started with a simple equipment failure, but the effects were pretty widespread. It disrupted all kinds of essential services, everything from traffic lights to subway lines.
So basically, the whole city was in the dark.
Pretty much. And it caused a ton of problems for people trying to get around and for businesses trying to operate. We're so reliant on technology and these interconnected systems these days, and this outage just showed how vulnerable we are when those systems fail.
I can only imagine the chaos.
Yeah.
How did people handle it?
Well, there was definitely some frustration and inconvenience, but for the most part, people remained calm and helped each other out. There were stories of neighbors sharing flashlights, restaurants giving free meals to those who were stranded, and complete strangers helping to direct traffic.
That's really encouraging to hear. It's good to know that people can still come together in times of need.
It's a testament to the human spirit, for sure. But the outage also serves as a reminder that we need to keep investing in reliable infrastructure, especially as we become even more dependent on technology.
That's a good point. We need to make sure those systems can handle the pressure. Now let's shift gears again and talk about a story from the entertainment industry that sparked some important conversations about the unique challenges faced by child stars.
The recent death of Michelle Trachtenberg, who you might remember from shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Gossip Girl, has really saddened a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a shock to hear about her passing, especially at such a young age. What made her story particularly poignant?
Well, she started her acting career when she was just a kid, and she achieved a lot of success early on. But she later spoke out about some of the negative experiences she had in the industry, alleging mistreatment from people in positions of power.
That's really concerning. It highlights the vulnerability of these young actors who were thrust into the spotlight at such a young age.
Exactly. They need to be protected and supported, and we need to make sure the industry is a safe and healthy place for them to work.
Her story is a reminder that there's a human cost to fame, especially for those who experience it so young. Now, for one last time today, let's dive back into the world of Pokemon. We've talked about their plans to stay relevant for years to come, and it seems like they're really embracing innovation to make that happen.
Oh, absolutely. They're experimenting with all sorts of cool technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, and even the metaverse. Imagine being able to truly immerse yourself in the world of Pokemon and interact with your favorite creatures in a whole new way.
That sounds amazing. Seems like they're really thinking outside the box.
They are. And they're not just focusing on the traditional gaming audience, they're creating content and experiences that appeal to people of all ages and backgrounds, which is a smart strategy for long-term
Well,
success.
it's definitely inspiring to see a company that's not afraid to embrace change and push the boundaries. Well, that brings us to the end of our news roundup for today. We've covered a lot of ground, from political conflicts and economic challenges to heartwarming stories of resilience and innovation.
It's been quite a journey, and while the news can sometimes feel overwhelming, it's important to remember that there's always hope and there are always people working to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. So stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. We'll be back soon with more news from around